Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Face-to-Face podcast. This is the first episode of Season 3, and today we have a very special guest, Mr. Mark Nicholas. So, a bit of background. Mr. Nicholas has been teaching at Burroughs for over 40 years, and he's taught classes like American Government, World Civ, U.S. History, and more, and he holds a bachelor's degree from Western Michigan University and taught at many high schools in Michigan before coming to Burroughs. And so sometimes I hear his students complaining about his strict grading system, but he's well known for being a very engaging storyteller and a thought-provoking teacher. And so, Mr. Nicholas, we're really happy that you took the time out of your day to be here with us, and it's great to have you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Whenever I think of Mr. Nicholas's class, like I've never personally been in it, but Sean's obviously been in it.
Of course.
And it's up there with Mr. Wagner about these crazy engaging classes where you just learn so much. So it's a real honor to be here with you today. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to talk to you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so starting off a little bit with your Burroughs experience. This is your last year at Burroughs. That's also part of the reason why we wanted to interview you before it was too late, I guess. And so I was just wondering, what are some of the most fond memories that you've had at the school? Like, what are the moments that kind of stand out compared to others?
Well, the single most important and fondest memory I have is very clear. It's a single moment out on the football field. I coached football here for 33 years, and 5 years before I came here, I coached it, and I enjoyed playing. So this is going to sound odd given what I just told you. But by far, my happiest moment was when the whistle sounded in a November game, last game of the year, and my son walked off the field in one piece. That is by far my most, because every moment he was out there, I was worried. When he walked off and smiled at me and I smiled at him, it was a great moment. Yay, you made it. He broke one thumb, but in the pantheon of football injuries, that seems minor. At this point, he doesn't even remember it.
Yeah.
That's my fondest memory.
Yeah. So what was it like coaching football for so long? I'm sure you must have been very avid in the sport, I guess.
It's funny. I wouldn't say that by the time I finished.
Really?
My last years, we had 2 future NFL players here. We had the best player in the state probably, Ezekiel Elliott.
Yeah.
And then Foye was great too. And we went to the state championship all those times, but I didn't really care anymore. I lost my competitive drive, and what I really liked was coaching during the week, not game day. I liked working on the week, trying to make people better players. And then whatever happened Saturday, we would see. That could take care of itself, but it didn't mean as much to me, and that's one of the reasons I got out. You need to be competitive if you're a coach. You need to want to win the games really badly, and I just didn't really care as much anymore about that. I thought if we coached them well, then the games would take care of themselves. But it was the teaching during the week that mattered to me, and the relationships that we developed.
I'm kind of curious, actually, going along with that. What do you think about the football culture at Burroughs? I feel like it's very toned down compared to other schools. Coming in with this new Friday Night Lights kind of what do you think about it?
Oh, it's no comparison to my high school.
Yeah,
because there's so many other things going on here.
Yeah,
I'm from a small town in the middle of Michigan, and on Friday night that was it.
Yeah.
There was nothing else going on, and it was huge. And we had a great program with a huge tradition behind it when I was there. And so it was here. It doesn't really exist in my mind compared to what I was used to. We've had excellent coaches, a lot of great players. The current coaches are doing a great job, I think. They're always outnumbered, always outgunned, and yet they somehow win a lot of games. And so there's my hat's off to all the players, all the coaches. It's just not me anymore. I used to watch. I turned off the Super Bowl. I just don't know.
Really?
Well, yeah.
Well, it was clear to me who was going to win in the early third quarter.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was clear to me who was going to win the game. And I was fine with that. I had been chiefed out. I didn't want any more of the Chiefs.
Me too.
I wanted them to win.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah. So do you think that we need more of these Friday Night Lights games, kind of revive the culture? What do you think that Burroughs needs to like bring that out?
I think it's great because you're going to just get a lot more people are going to
sure.
come to a Friday night game.
For sure.
When I came here, I didn't realize anybody played football on Saturday. The entire state of Michigan plays football on Friday night.
Yeah.
So there are no Saturday games.
Yeah.
And I walked out and looked at the field and said, "Where are the lights?" And I realized, they must play at a different time. But I think it brings a lot more students out.
Yeah.
And I think that's really great.
Definitely.
And so I hope they do it more often.
Yeah.
It'd be great if they could do it every Friday night. That's home game,
Yeah, for sure. I know that was the first time I went to a football game.
That's same for me. Same for me.
I've gone to like the Burroughs MICDS games, but that's about it.
It's a little bit unfortunate though because we're on the come up. We're gonna win eventually.
It's hard here for you and teachers to go to a lot of games. There's just too much going on in people's lives, and so it's difficult to put everything aside and say, I'm going to spend this number of hours doing this, even if you want to go.
I mean, next to me here are two of like the busiest guys I know. I feel like, I'm not gonna lie, like Sean.
Let's move on. So before the recording, you were talking to us a little bit about this obscure, like mysterious figure of history who died like 8 years ago. So I wanted to know, who is this person and why is he such an influential figure for you?
His name was Hugh Thompson.
I have not heard of him.
No, you're right. You haven't. And I can email you a picture of him later if you want. And he was a shining light in one of the darkest moments of American history. He's somebody who, in a moment in American history where you could say, oh, God, I wish I wasn't part of this in any way, that this wasn't my country doing this. He stepped out, risked his own life to try to save people. He was at the My Lai massacre in 1968 in Vietnam. It was a massacre where Charlie Company, which had taken huge losses, they had seen their friends die in horrible ways, booby traps, snipers, and they could never engage the Viet Cong or the North Vietnamese. So their frustration level was high. Was told they were going to be dropped into a village that was going to be full of Viet Cong and there was going to be a real live firefight, a real battle. And when they got there and they were dropped in, that wasn't true. The people they were supposed to be fighting were 100 miles west. And all that was in the village were women, children, and old men. And they completely lost it. And they just started killing people. They massacred over 500 people, according to the Vietnamese. If you ask Americans, it's less, but does it really matter at a certain point? And they did it. It was all morning. They stopped for breaks. They ate chocolate bars. They killed babies being held in parents' arms. They did just kind of the worst things you can imagine. And Hugh Thompson was a helicopter pilot. And he was in a scout helicopter, one of the smaller helicopters, and he was flying in that area and he started to witness some of the things that were going on. And he dropped his helicopter in between a line of American soldiers with their guns drawn and a group of civilians from My Lai, and stepped out and basically put himself between them and said, "You aren't killing these people." And they said, "Yes, we are." And he said, "No." And he told his machine gunner in the chopper, he said, he had 50 caliber machine guns, point this at these guys. And if they start firing, you start shooting. And he started taking people in and out of that combat area. And then when it was all over, he saved dozens of people. And when it was all over, he was called in by the commanding officer to tell his story. And when he told it, they buried it. They made sure nobody heard it. And then they started sending him out alone on dangerous missions because they wanted him to die. They wanted his story to go away. And his chopper was shot down 2 or 3 times. One of the times he broke his back, but he survived. And a couple of years later, the entire story came out about what happened at My Lai, and then his part of the story. He never came forward. He was not seeking any kind of attention, but his part of the story came out too. And his gunner is still alive, a guy named Lawrence Coburn. To listen to him talk about Hugh Thompson is to understand that this was a great man.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean,
there's other, I'm sure, you could find in any spot in history moments like that where people step forward that you never hear of.
yes.
They lie in graves somewhere that very few people visit and nobody knows about them, but they're the ones who hold everything together, basically.
That's deep. This makes me kind of think of something I learned in your class of like one death is a tragedy, like a million deaths is a statistic.
Yeah, you're quoting Joseph Stalin now, so we're deep in the weeds with the tyrants already and things. But
it's true.
It's true.
Like as you were saying, like 200 versus 500, people just kind of look at it as like a number because the sort of person gets alienated by the number and the amount.
Well, it seems very far away, not just in time, but in distance. I mean, if you look at the conflicts going on today in the world, how much attention do most of us really pay to them? How much can we pay to them?
Right, especially there's so much going on.
Yeah, the Russians have kidnapped 25,000 Ukrainian children, and virtually no one knows that. Yeah, they're trying to Russify them. They've taken them to turn them into Russians, which was a program that Germans ran in World War II, called Eindeutschung, and they would make these children German, just basically steal them from their parents. In Poland, it was especially bad. So.
I wanted to ask a question, just because I was thinking a little bit about this before our recording. So through like history, there's been so many events that kind of shape human like cultures and interactions and things like that. But do you think there's ever like a core, a human nature that's always standing firm, or do you think that gets shaped, that changes over time, like morals or like ethics or even just like those kinds of beliefs?
I do believe there is a foundation that is pretty unchanged. And to elaborate on that is to get pretty deeply into the things we study here. But I would say that technology, of course, never sits still.
Yeah.
At one point, the plow was cutting edge technology, no pun intended, as it cuts the soil. But, at one point that was the tech. In my day, a calculator came out when I was a junior in high school. That was the first calculator I ever saw. And I remember a kid bringing it into algebra class and going, "What is that?" And him starting to show us like, "Oh, I need one of those. I have to have one of those." And of course, your world, look how we're recording this. This changes amazingly. But I think there is a kind of basic human nature that is fairly consistent. And it's driven by evolutionary forces and societal forces. There are things that all humans need that are hardwired into us. Food, clothing, shelter, comfort, other people. And then there are things that society shapes and changes us. Your world is completely different from my world at your age. The change is dizzying. It's just really, I worry about it. Even though I think underlying it, that you do have firm foundations of morality, and people know what's right. They're never always going to do it, but they know. But these things really start to change the way we interact. I'm worried about alienation, and you've got me on a subject that is going to bore you. But I will tell you that, to me, the baseline of my existence is that it's a three-dimensional world. You have to engage all of it. These, no matter how sophisticated they ever get, are two-dimensional. Therefore, it cannot be the foundation of my life. I can't in any way take away their importance. They're fundamental, and they're going to be increasingly fundamental. But it's not real. It's a screen. Okay, now it can have real world consequences, the things that come out of the screen and the things that you do with them, but it's not real. And I won't make that a foundation of what matters to me. You know, what I want is to be outside. Do you know Mr. Henningsen?
Yeah. I had him in
He's a good friend of mine, taught here for many years. And he said it best. He said, when life gets toxic, go outside. You know, and for me, that's right. You know, that's what I do. And engaging with people like this. You know, if you'd said we're going to do this through screens, I said fine, and we could do it. This is better. This is just better. And so I worry about where that's going. I think it was great when we farmed out our muscle work. The Industrial Revolution, despite its environmental consequences, which are disastrous, took all that work that we had to do using calories and muscles or horses or wind and water and multiplied it and gave us everything that's in this room and how we got here and all of those things.
And gave us more time.
But I am very concerned about, I will not farm out my mental work. And that's what I worry about this stuff doing. If I'm going to write something, I would never open anything. No Grammarly, no AI. I got to write it. It has to come from me. It's a creative process.
Then you become dependent on other stuff.
Yeah, and you know, it's a use it or lose it. Atrophy will set in. You will no longer be able to do things that you used to be able to do. So I that's my concern. But I am, as one of my friends once told me, you're not a 20th century man living in the 21st century. You're a 19th century man living in the 21st century. So,
for the mental work thing, I'm curious because if you're using the analogy of the physical work, people's physical requirements changed because they adapted to the technologies. What if, like, our mental work still remains at a certain capacity or a certain level, but it's just for different things, and then we use this to like supplement that and progress even further? What do you think?
I think that's probably what's going to happen. What I'm worried about is the creative process. That is what I think is going to go away. You know, because it's too easy.
You don't have a cell phone yourself, right?
I do not.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That's right.
And you can put it on my tombstone. You can call the engraver. He never had a cell phone.
Well, I have a question then for the creative thing. If AI or whatever technologies develop, and like you said, they can create these kinds of arts, maybe not as well yet, but let's say potentially they could create it just as well, if not better, then it kind of satisfies like the demand for those kinds of arts. And so humans won't have much incentive to create the arts besides simply creating the arts. And so, like, you know, there's no like economic incentives or anything like that. Don't you think that's like a natural way of how the creative process will die out?
It would be one way. I hadn't thought about that, Jerry. It's an interesting kind of follow the bouncing ball down the street far enough and you end up at this destination. I was much more worried that people will just stop doing it. You know, if you could, and I don't know what your own habits are, but if you could, if your teacher said, yeah, use it to write, wouldn't you use it to write all the time?
Yeah.
So you can do something else, you know?
Sometimes, yes, for sure.
Well, then you're never going to learn to write. You know, you're never going to access those parts. Real writing is hard. It's the hardest thing my students do. Studying history is not hard. You know, you have to remember things, and that's not something that's normal anymore because you have everything that remembers it for you. And so there's that. But the writing, getting the right words, organizing things properly, being able to be persuasive on your own, you know, you coming up with the arguments and putting them down simply and clearly, that's hard work. It's really hard. And if you can farm that out, people are going to do it.
I want to talk a little bit about like humanities and history and like philosophy, because that's like super interesting for me. But as like a starter question, do you have a favorite author or favorite book that you recommend?
In philosophy, history, or just period?
Just period.
I am an avid reader, and so I've read too much to have a single favorite book.
Saw
Any,
you
like,
reading
authors?
whenever we came in here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not even that.
Really?
No, not even that. There my tastes vary greatly. Sometimes I love to read a Stephen King book. I think he actually understands humans very well.
Yeah.
But most people will consider that very lowbrow. I read Friedrich Nietzsche. I find his ideas fascinating. I don't think they would work as a philosophy to run a country or anything like that. I've read this woman that most people abhor, and I don't agree with her, but I read her because she engaged me. She was her name's Ayn Rand. She wrote a book called The Fountainhead, Atlas Shrugged. She's a kind of goddess of the marketplace. And I want to be engaged when I read. So I enjoyed reading her because what she was saying had me going. She had my full attention, when I was reading. And that's not easy to do. It's easy to let your attention wander as you read. So there's three people. I like to read mysteries. I like historical fiction. So I teach my senior class literature and history. And if you look at the selections we do there, All Quiet on the Western Front is a great book. It's a great book because it's not a combat story. Some people, especially boys, read it and it's like, well, where's all the fighting? It's like, that's not what it's about. It's about what the experience meant to somebody. It's about
Very
what the
intense.
experience meant to somebody only 2 years older than you guys, who was in the trenches, trying to survive. And it's a fascinating look into the mind of a young person trying to deal with what we call just horrible trauma. He never used that word, but that's what he's really dealing, and how it broke him. How they, as he wrote, we escaped the shells, but the war destroyed us. And so I like reading books that do that to me.
When we were talking with, I want to transition a little bit here. When we were talking with Mr. Wagner, and also just from my lessons with Mr. Wagner, like he talks a lot about Buddhism and Buddhist principles, and he's a huge fan of like these Buddhist truths and principles, not following them, on the path of enlightenment, but following them in a common life, in a living sort of way. I was wondering, what about for you? Are there any religions or beliefs? I think from you and Mr. Wagner, I see a lot of stoicism in both of you, but what do you think, like, from personal perspective?
I admire Stoics a lot. I think it's a good way to approach life because it makes a fundamental kind of distinction that can give you a foundation to lead your daily life. Like you were saying, Mr. Wagner's Buddhism can lead him in a daily way. And that foundation is that you need to be able to distinguish between what you can and cannot control. And the things that you cannot control are the things that can kind of hammer at you and your consciousness and distract you from being really the kind of person you want to be. And so I like that as a foundation. Marcus Aurelius, I think, was a remarkable person because he was not only a great ruler, but also a great philosopher. And he said something that I think is, and my parents were, my dad probably read some Stoicism, but my mom not. But they hammered at their kids this: if it's not true, don't say it. If it's not right, don't do it. That was the fundamental lessons we got. And I found out later, those are kind of the fundamental lessons of Stoicism too. And so I'm strongly attracted to that because of that. But I think more than anything else, my parents were hugely influential. There are 5 kids in all of our lives, and this was quite intentional on their part. There was going to be things that this is the way you approach people. This is the way you approach the world. This is the way you do things. Like for my dad, the way you do anything is the way you do everything. In other words, nothing was beneath giving your full attention to if you were doing it. If you're doing it at that time, you give it your full attention. And so what fascinates me is not just from people I read, but from, of course, my parents and other people I've known, is the influence of people on me who are no longer here, which is profound. really, really strong. I feel that tug, and I feel their influence, even though my parents have been gone a long time. And aunts and uncles, other people who have shaped me, are still with me. And so to me, that's my kind of compass, has come in from all those influences and created whatever I am right now.
Yeah, that's interesting. What about like religion? Is there a religion with?
I was raised in a religion. I was raised in the Presbyterian Church, which is a Protestant denomination. And when I was going to church when I was a kid and through high school, and it was a family thing, you were going to go every Sunday. And it too has had an impact on me. But like many people in my generation, I don't know what your generation's like, I moved away from a kind of organized religion. I haven't been to a Presbyterian service, although there are 2 Presbyterian churches right near my house.
Yeah.
I haven't been to one in many, many, many years, and don't know if I'll go again. But I certainly was somewhat shaped by that too. I came to believe that Jesus is one of the great teachers the world has ever seen, maybe the best that the world has ever seen. But I got to a point where I couldn't believe in the miraculous parts of the Bible.
Yeah.
That's just not who I am. My outlook is skeptical and secular and scientific. And so it's difficult for the miraculous parts. But the parables, the teaching parts of it, I think are fantastic. They're remarkable. And that you could, if you just lived by those, you'd be fine. You'd be a very good person.
So do you believe in more like individual kind of religion, like on a person-to-person basis?
I believe that without spirituality, your life gets kind of barren. That you need something. But I think it becomes something different for a lot of people. Do you know who Frank Lloyd Wright was, the great architect?
I've heard the name.
He's America's most famous 20th century architect. He said, I believe in God, but I spell it nature. And that's one way of doing it, a kind of pantheism that you can look at. But I do, for me, it's the best moments that I could describe as religious or spiritual are very, very quiet. And I think all of us get these moments where you get some clarity, and it's almost always when you're alone. And you can sense a kind of stillness. That's another thing I worry about. There's not enough of those moments in the hubbub of our lives.
Too much
nowadays.
Perpetual motion.
Yes, there's not enough time. I had a moment after an extremely long and bitter Michigan winter, just one of the worst I've ever seen. And that's saying something. It was the first warm day of that we'd had. Like by that, I mean, it was maybe 40. And it was beautiful sun and lived in a rural area. And I was walking across a field and I just felt something. I'm not going to be able to articulate this, but it was like a religious moment, a spiritual moment. There was just something in the air, in what I was seeing around me, in that just absolutely incredible blue sky, like the color you don't see often. And it's like, this is something special.
I think the idea of organized religion is interesting. Like you said that you kind of detached yourself a little bit from that. I think it is interesting because, at least like from a young person perspective, from my perspective, it does feel like the organized religion can help you to follow a certain path, but maybe the truest spirituality is an individual journey, like following whoever's teachings you want, like whether it's Siddhartha's or Jesus or whoever. So I thought that was an interesting idea.
Yeah, and I'm not, for many people, they get their life is based on the religious principles they learn. But there was a moment in Western history especially where a kind of split occurred between reason and revelation. Revelation is the revealed word of God. So if you're a Christian, revelation appears in your sacred text, in your scriptures, in the Bible. And if you're a fundamentalist, if you're a real, true believer, it's there for you. It's there for you. You know, the blueprint is laid out for you. If you reject the revelation, the revealed word of God, in favor of reason, which is, it's in here, it's between my ears. You know, I have to be able to use my ability to reason to come up with the way to go through the world. You start to get a split between those two groups. And it's not like they're mutually exclusive completely, but at some point you kind of have to go in one direction or the other.
So different settlements are different. Like we learned about John Winthrop and like his first settlement in Massachusetts. See on a Hill. Like to me, I don't know, you know, I wasn't there at the time, but it seemed like John Winthrop's motives were pretty religiously driven. So like, do you think that kind of colonization aligns with the principles of Christianity? Because he's actually trying to spread Christianity, but in the same time, he's displacing, you know, Native Americans and doing all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I don't think it aligns with the teachings of Jesus that I was mentioning earlier, that I think of as the fundamentals of Christianity. But the church is not Jesus. The church is a human institution that was created. Christianity is in different groups now, you know, that was created and comes out. And so you're going to have these kind of basic human instincts and motives that come through with this, tempered by and influenced by the teachings. I mean, you can't look at the Massachusetts Bay Colony or Plymouth Colony or any of them and say that they're just there because they fled religious persecution. You know, once they got here, sure, they were trying to establish what they thought of as godly communities, but they had to do it in a real world. That was already inhabited by other people, you know, that were not going to be like them, you know, and conflict seems pretty inevitable.
I actually, last week, I actually just skimmed, like I had some time and then I was like, oh, this looks interesting. I skimmed the chapter, The Grand Inquisitor from
Brothers Karamazov.
Yeah, I couldn't understand
Amazing.
I couldn't understand it when I first read it.
It's like a really famous like Russian novel, right?
Dostoevsky or something like that. And I couldn't understand it when I actually read the text. It was too complicated for me. But I looked up like a summary and everything. And that's like the exact same as what you're just saying. It's like the human institution is completely separate from Jesus' actual teachings. It's like the priest, the Grand Inquisitor was gonna burn Jesus for coming back because he was like, Jesus, you're too pure for humans. Humans aren't like that anymore. Like they need security, they need food, they need shelter, they need somebody to follow, and that's the Catholic Church. And so you can't be here anymore. Humans aren't going to follow purely your teachings; they're going to follow the Catholic Church instead. So it's like the difference between organizational religion and then actual spirituality, I think, is pretty interesting.
Well, you almost by fate or destiny or accident, whatever, gets one of the most famous pieces in Western literature.
Really?
Yes, that is one of the most famous things. People who study literature seriously, they all know it. Okay. You know, that is an incredibly impactful and influential part of that book. Okay. Now, the book is 400 other pages.
Heard of the book.
You know,
I have to go back and read it.
No, I haven't. But I've read The Grand Inquisitor scene because I said, I've got to read this. I have read Dostoevsky. He wrote Crime and Punishment.
Yes.
In a book called Notes from Underground. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And nobody's life is boring except mine. Dostoevsky was kneeling in front of his grave about to be shot by the Tsar's police when a reprieve came through. He was seconds from being shot and falling into his own grave. Yeah. Think about that.
So he saw the darkest parts of his life, basically.
Yeah. And yet, somehow there's a kind of spiritual hope in his books that I've read, the books that I've read.
Okay. I have another question. We may have to wrap up in a few minutes, but I have one question so you studied a lot of history, and I asked Mr. Wagner a similar question. But you and Mr. Wagner know different periods of history better than the other. And so I was wondering, in history, have there ever been examples of a civilization's collapse or a big mistake that they made? And are there any parallels that you see today or that you can predict in the future? Like something that's like a pattern that could occur?
Well, those patterns that you're talking about, there's a famous English historian named Arnold Toynbee. He was a 20th century historian who cycled through, I think it was 27 different civilizations looking for these patterns. You know, and another German named Oswald Spengler who said that civilizations are organic and they have a birth and a maturity and a kind of prime, and then they decline and go away. So that's really kind of what you're asking. If you're looking for key moments where you can say, this is why that happened, there's usually, in the big, broad picture, there's usually two things. There's either internal decay or external threats. Or a combination of those things. You know, it's usually those two things come together. But it's the idea, going back to one of the original people who thought about these, a Greek philosopher named Heraclitus, who said that only change is constant. You know, there is no constant but change. Everything's in flux. And so in that sense, no civilization is going to be permanent. The one that interests me most, that I see the most kind of consistency in, is Chinese civilization. That in China, that you've had obviously immense changes over time. But there's a kind of underlying, you were asking about this earlier, foundation to what the Chinese societies are like that hasn't profoundly shifted the way some others have. There's a kind of base that you can look back 1,000, 5,000 years and say, oh, there it is. You know, right there it is, and you can see it kind of work its way through. So I'm very interested in that, because they kind of fly in the face of Toynbee and Spengler's idea that these things cycle through and they have a birth and a death. Now, obviously, the China of today isn't even anything like it was when I was your age.
Of course,
it's profoundly different.
Of course.
But not the kind of underlying principles that I think that govern that society seem remarkably consistent to me. And that's really interesting. Maybe we can wrap it up by going where we started. Is there a kind of firm foundation on which human behavior has not altered all that much? And I would say, if you look at China, you could see some of that.
All right.
Okay. Yeah, that's super interesting.
Thank you so
Thanks
much
for
for
Yes,
joining us.
thank you.
Yeah.
I enjoyed this.
It's a
It
really
was fun.
interesting conversation, and so
Thank you so much to our
thank you for
viewers
taking
for
the time.
listening. You know, make
all,
sure to
all three of them. Thank you for listening.
thank you so much for listening. Make sure to follow the Instagram, rate on Spotify.
Okay, but thank you, Mr.
Thank
Nicholas, for taking
You're
the time.
welcome. I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.